You're listening to Tara Lynn's A Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from 2 Red Dead Redemption panels that were recorded from the audience at MomoCon 2019.
So, you do speak a lot about how in the game it's not just voice work, but it's performance work, it's motion capture. I guess the first thing out of my mouth when I thought about that was, did you get to ride a horse in motion capture?
Yeah.
You did?
They had about a week of horses in the volume capturing all the animations for the horses. And, although I wasn't present, I don't think you were.
No, I wasn't present. But we had our version of horses.
Yeah, which would be dimensionally accurate. So it would be an oil drum with a saddle on it and 4 little pipes that would be the same height as a horse with a little horse's head. And that's what we predominantly worked with. And then the amazing animators after the fact then would be able to put in the motion of either a canter or a gallop or a trot or what have you. But they did have a whole day of the horses just going in and around and running around and literally running around in circles. And they told me it was quite hard to get the balls to stay on the front. and that they pooped a lot.
They didn't have horse-sized leotards that they could slip in.
That's a good question. You know, I wouldn't want to be the one that put it on the horse.
They did have dog-sized leotards.
Yes.
There were some dogs in the game that were dogs of the developers and the animators. They made cameos in the game.
Very well trained, but they would wag their tails so much the ball would often fall off on the end. You know.
So how did the state of motion capture change over the course of working on it? Did it change during the course of the project? And have you worked on other ones where you had to work with like previous technologies and is it advanced a lot?
Well, the first Red Dead, well, not the second Red Dead Redemption, which is technically the second Red Dead, was the first game, to my understanding, that Rockstar did that was full performance capture. But it was, they still had, did you see one of the old ones they had in the studio? In one of the studios they had the old one. But it was essentially, it was jury rigged. It was the inside of like a construction helmet. And then there was a big, almost like a duck bill that was coming off of it. And there was a little camera that was hitting everything your face did. By the time we got to the second, it was a proper helmet that was, for those of us who were there a lot, it was custom made to our heads.
Yeah.
Mine is big. And then there's a pole coming off of it, like a tusk, and with a camera on it.
And when we started the project, they were SD cameras, and then, you know, as the technology unfolded in front of our eyes, they switched to HD, and then the light then became a lot less bright, which was much less distracting for the performer, which was really cool. And there was lots of other advancements too that were made during the period, the 5 years that we worked on Red Dead, but you know, it's over my head. My first foray into performance capture was a game, it was about a dozen, maybe 13 years ago now, and even just seeing the difference in the technology from that to when my first day on Red Dead 2 was amazing. Because, you know, they used to have the balls on your face, and then if you start running around or you got sweaty, they start falling off, or if you just wanted to wipe your nose like you would like in a scene, like any normal human action that you might do, you know. So the technology, as it gets more and more advanced, it allows the performer a lot more freedom to do those little nuances and idiosyncratic human behaviors that we have grown to love and see in video games now, you know.
So I guess when you do voiceover work, it's I guess a key difference would be that you have the script in front of you. You wouldn't really have that for motion capture, would you? You'd have to actually memorize your lines and be like a theater performance.
Some actors were caught off guard. They would show up imagining that it was not the nature. The prevailing presumption is that a video game is going to be voice work, and that was never this. I would say, probably 5% of the work that I did was in the booth, and the rest of it was with other actors on the soundstage. And as Dutch, I would end up with you might have noticed he has some monologues.
I haven't watched I haven't played the game, so.
The first batch of pages I got after I signed this NDA, which effectively says, if you break this NDA, we will kill you, all of your family, and everyone you went to junior high school with. But I get these pages, including this monologue that is 2 pages long.
It was, yeah.
It was huge, and it's about, and you know, as an actor, typically, you got a script memorized, you get a buddy over and you run lines. I can't have a buddy over and run lines because I'm bound by this non-disclosure agreement. So I am on my own trying to put this all together. So 2 years into the gig, or 3 or 4, when someone would show up thinking it's voiceover, and I remember one guy came into the green room and he said to me, how much do they care about these lines being, you know, perfect? And I was like, well, you know, the owner of the company wrote it, so I think you probably want to be off book. But watching other people struggle with my pain was enjoyable.
Yeah, a lot of people we've worked with, I think there's close to 1,000 people on that project for doing the performance capture aspect of it. And for lots of those actors, it was their first foray into the medium, you know, so it was really interesting. They would always do the same thing, because when you walk into the volume, you have what was called previs on the screen, so that you can see, for lack of a better word, your avatar within the actual environment that you're acting in. Whereas the volume would have a dimensionally accurate set. You would look on the screen, much like that one over there. So I'm Roger Clark, we would look on that, it would be Arthur pointing, you know? And so the actors would come in and they always do the same thing. They go, oh, wow. That's so cool. Or in some cases, when they didn't learn their lines, they're just standing like this.
Did it do eyeball tracking?
Yeah, the face cam would pick all that up. And even in the booth, we still did facial capture because the animators would need to sync the lips.
Would they correct that if you were, you know, forgot something and was just...
They
wouldn't use it. We'd just go, do it again, Raj, you know?
Well, that was a fun distinction between the first game and the second game.
Oh, yeah.
Was that in the first game, they didn't yet know how to cut. So if you go and you watch Red Dead, like the scene with the professor and John, and that was the first one I ever did.
Nastas.
Not Nastas.
Did you know he was Nastas too?
Don't shoot me, Mr. Marston. That was a temp track. It wasn't. That's a longer story. But all of those scenes in the first one were a single take because they couldn't edit. There's one scene where they added a bit of dialogue. I think when I shoot the woman in the back of the head, because such a nice fellow. They added one, John saying the easy Dutch was ADR, but the rest of it was all single takes. So we would have days of rehearsal with build team, the ones who would build these sets, these dimensionally accurate sets that we were on, would learn how they were going to build the sets for a given day of performance capture. And we, as the actors, would work with the director and each other to find out how we were going to play it. When it came time to do the second one, the engine was so well tuned, and we didn't have rehearsal days and capture days. We would do the scenes, we'd leave, and then the genius build team would come in, and then they build a steamship or a couple of horses or a cliff or a barn or whatever they had to build. But finally, we could, on the second one, you could screw up in the middle of the take and not throw out the whole take, which was a relief. A world of difference, indeed.
Yeah, I would imagine it's hard to do cuts when you're doing motion capture because it's not exactly that you just have room tone for somebody's body.
Right. Well, they figured it, but there was, when we did the scene on the cliff, spoiler alert, on the first Red Dead, we did the scene on the cliff, and so we've got these helmets on, and at this point, there was a version of it in the new one, but when we were doing the first one, everybody would have their little monitors with their faces on it. There was the sort of the close-up that the camera was getting, And they'd stay on even when people were going to have breaks. It's no secret that Rob Weedoff was a smoker. I was too at the time. So we'd be off on our smoke breaks and the camera would still be on and you could see the people outside having a cigarette. But we were doing the scene on the cliff with Our Time Has Passed, and our director, Rod Edge, was there. When Dutch throws the gun off the cliff, Rod caught it. And if he didn't like the take, because we couldn't edit, he would stop the tape before we get to me falling off the cliff, because there was a big knob in the back of my head. Do you know this story?
Yeah, it's been a while.
But there was this big knob in the back of my head, and I could only hit the mat so many times before I was going to become a prima donna and storm off the set. So we had a take where it's me and Rob, and we're doing this scene, and I'm on the edge of the cliff, and I'm wearing cowboy boots, and there's a little lip, it's about a foot off the ground, and there's a crash mat behind it. And I'm saying, when I'm gone, they'll find another monster. And then my boot clipped on the edge of the cliff, and I'm starting to fall backwards. And I go, "Our time's passed!" I fell off the bed. And Rod was so sincere. He was like, "Did you mean to do that? Crazy person?" I said, "No, of course I didn't mean to do that." And I said, "But I really loved to have been able to see the expression on my face." And Rod goes with a twinkle in his eye, "Oh, we can do that." So they put it up on the big screen. We going, "Our time!" That was a fun day.
Well, you mentioned you had done Noctis in the first one as well as.
Well, Noctis is 6'6". I'm 6'6". Dutch is 6 feet. So the idea was that I was just going to do Noctis as effectively I was just a body double. But I'm an actor, so I treated it like that was my role, even though I knew it wasn't. And they ended up liking the work. It was the thing that I was really, I think, among the things I'm most proud of in my career was a few internet postings back then that said, how can the company that hired that actor who was so good playing Dutch Vanderlyn hire that terrible actor who played the Native American robot? And I said, "Hey, it's me. I'm great again, I suck."
Range. It's called range. Did you do any other? I know in a lot of voice and production work, it's there's always bit parts and quick voices that need to be filled in. Was that sort of thing standard with motion capture? Did you body double for other ones? And did you have, I guess, for lack of a better term, stunt doubles that would do harder stuff?
Yeah, we did everything except the major stunts, but then often we would stand in and do body doubles when they needed an extra body as well. Here's another fun fact. Spoiler alert. But, at the very end, when the credits are rolling, after you completed the epilogue, is John, and those little montage bits that they have. And there's one where you see Mary visiting Arthur's gravestone. You guys remember that part? I was Mary. And I built that one.
You got to be at your own funeral.
And of course, the real Mary, Julie Chesnick, was amazing to work with. But she, she wasn't in that day, so Raj, do you mind standing by your gravestone and looking sad?
You nailed it.
Well, since now they can do editing, were you able to do were any scenes improvised, or was it pretty much by the book?
I mean, we had worked so long with each other that, there was a huge bond of mutual trust going on. We learned to trust the writing, and the writers also trusted our interpretation of the characters themselves, too. So there was a little bit of flexibility on it, but, to be honest, we knew that they knew what they were doing, and then but at the same time, if we ever had any other ideas, we knew we would always be listened to, too. So, For the most part, we kind of stuck to the page, but you know, there was the few ad-libs. I can't think of anything off the top of my head now, but if I do, I'll shout it out later.
There's a couple. There's a couple.
Yeah.
I do remember there was one time we were walking through Guarma. I don't even know if it made it into the game or not, although I've made this mistake in the past where I've said things were cut and then I played the game the second time and it's like, oh, it wasn't cut, I just didn't see it. But we were walking through Guarma and Fusar, not Fusar, who's the guy that helps? Hercule says something about like, you guys are going to be hunted all over this island. And I, on one take, said, yeah, we get a lot of that. And I felt kind of conspicuous throwing that in there, so we did the second take of it, and I didn't put it in. And our director Rod said, what happened to that line? And I said, well, it wasn't a line. I said, I like that one, keep it. Although I think it got cut.
So how long did this project take compared to some of the other performances you've done? Sounds like it's a rather involved process, considering just the scale of it.
Yeah, I auditioned for in the beginning of 2013, and my first day on the job was August of 2013, and my last day on the job was August of 2018.
That's some time. I found out around it, I got a call saying they wanted to know my dates for an untitled, I knew what the hell it was. So I knew about it in July 13. I signed the NDA October 13. My first day on set was January 14. But I like to, not just pitch other things that I did, although see Ant-Man and the Wasp and Belko experiment. But in the time it took to do Red Dead, I shot a film in South America. It got cut, it got premiered, it made it to home video, and then I shot a Marvel movie. That got cut, that got premiered, that got to home video, and I still couldn't talk about the fact that I've been working on Red Dead for nearly 5 years. So it's a lot of time. But it was well spent. There's not a thing to complain about.
Yeah, I think it's like a few dozen hours in the can eventually is what we got. I think it's comparable to maybe 5 or 6 seasons of a TV show, the amount of work that went in writing and recording that went in.
5 or 6 seasons of a TV show that you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
That doesn't go on TV.
And that nobody has seen. Yeah.
So with a project that big and that long, I'm sure the character has maybe gone through a bit of a metamorphosis, but it's all going to be in one game. Did you have to do any reshoots? Did the characters develop quirks or habits that you later went back and added into earlier scenes and shots?
You know, I think they approached the project at the beginning. They had a kind of skeletal image of what it was going to be, but they didn't make any very fine and detailed commitments early on because they knew that they were going to be molding and adapting depending on the actors and seeing what things worked and what things didn't. So yeah, there were a few tweaks. You know, I had to change a fair bit because at the beginning Arthur was very angry. He was much more angry than what he eventually turned out to be. So we were able to tweak that a little bit. I know that they spent ages trying to find the right fit for Charles Smith, which they eventually did with the amazing Nishir Dalal. Let's give it a round. So there was always a constant evolution of characters and whatnot, but you know, obviously we had to keep in mind the consistency as well. And for the consistency as the playable character is a bit of a double-edged sword too, because you know, my actions are as morally ambiguous as what the player decides to do with me, you know, so it's up to you whether or not Arthur is loyal, a dishonorable guy, or an honorable guy, you know. So my biggest challenge, especially for the latter half of the story, would be come up with lines as truthful and as honestly as I could that would suit both an honorable path and a dishonorable path. And of course the amazing writing by Dan Hauser and Rupert Humphreys, thank you, and Michael Unsworth helped that a great deal. But when you know you're the playable character, that was one of the challenges I had to face.
There's also, because of the tech, I ended up, a lot of the time, I'd have a big speech. All the time I'd have a big speech. And at the end of the speech, I'd say, you two go up and do that, and you two go up and do that. And you can go with them, or you can go with them. And then 5 months later, they'd be playing through and they'd be figuring out, oh, you know what? We got to send 2 different people over there and 2 different people over there. So you re-record the dialogue for that. So now it's Mr. Pearson is waiting for you over there, and Mr. Bell's waiting for you over there. Okay, all right. And then they change it again. But the thing that ended up happening is that there are some scenes in there. I can think of a couple of things that took forever to get just so. But all of the scenes feel so immediate, like they're just happening. And that's a tribute to the writing, to the animating. But because of the technology, there are scenes in there where there is performance capture that we did in 2014, booth work that we did in 2015, additional performance capture that we did in 2017. And by the way, the actor playing that role got replaced. And so it's so there's this sort of Frankenstein of these scenes into what we ended up with.
Yeah.
It was amazing to be a participant in that process.
In 2018, I was finishing scenes that I had started in 2013.
I guess it would be almost like if you were working on some sort of TV production, going back and reshooting season 1 shots.
Yeah, the continuity nightmare that would cause in live action. Can you imagine? What if your actor got fat?
And lost his hair. Wait, what are we talking about?
He's got loads more gray hair now. What do we do?
Were there any, with a long production like this, were there any actors that they had gotten for a part, were perfect for it, but then they had schedule conflicts later on and they had to be replaced?
John O'Craig, who was the second uncle, Spider Madison
played him in the original.
And so we had a wonderful John O'Craig who played Arthur, and unfortunately he passed away halfway through the shoot, and then he was replaced by the amazing James McBride, who had to do the Herculean task of ADRing all of John's lines. But thankfully, Rockstar did keep, whenever you hear Uncle singing, it's still John O'Craig. So,
and they made the map, O'Craig's Run, is named after our Patriot John, that we all miss terribly.
May rest in peace. So there was a lot of that.
So I noticed that you guys had come down here from Motor City and while I was doing some research for this panel, I noticed that you had been to Kuwait earlier in the year. So what's it like traveling to American cons versus like foreign American cons? I mean, I know it's a little different. I know you're from Boston.
Kuwait and Detroit are exactly the same.
Yeah, but I know you're from Boston, and you're
I am from Boston.
not.
He's from Jersey.
I was born in Jersey. I know I sound like that. That's why. Yeah, Kuwait was the first one we did. That was in January, and it's the only one there. Obviously, Canada put notwithstanding, but it's the only one outside of the U.S. we did as well. We're still kind of new to this, and what's been really amazing is when we sit and meet you guys, and we find out how many for you it's your first con as well, and it just means so much to us that you took the time to come out and attend the con for the first time because you liked our work and you liked the game, so that's amazing. But the support, the fans haven't been, they're kind of the same no matter where you go in the world,
That was the overwhelming thing to me about Kuwait, was to go to a place I never imagined that I would go. I was very happy to. But you're meeting folks in cosplay literally on the other side of the world, and you start to recognize that because of our association with Rockstar and what they have achieved as a company over all of these years, that we get to intersect in popular culture in a manner that is literally global. And at a time, I figured when there's a lot of friction in this world, to be participating in a story that is connecting with people all over the planet, literally, it's humbling is not a sufficient word.
Well, did you, I guess, did you imagine that you'd be visiting all these sort of things? Or did you picture yourself, I guess what I want to ask is, what were you really doing before getting into this? Because is this kind of your main gig that you started, or?
As an actor, do you mean?
I guess acting in general, like.
Well, I got my degree from NYU in '96 and spent a lot of time working very hard for no money in downtown theater in New York in the '90s, and then I moved out to Los Angeles in '99 because I heard they needed another actor. I thought I could help. And my bread and butter's been pretty much TV, Big Guy Number 2, I'm Your Man, Large Russian. I'm pretty good at that. I'd often be the guy that you think he's the killer, and then I'm not the killer. It's a hell of a thing and a wonderful thing to be a character actor, a journeyman actor, and the sort of natural state as an actor is unemployed. So you're basically treading water. So for all you kids who are really excited about the possibility, just know you're spending most of the time treading water, and then every once in a while a little boat will come along, and that's a part. And sometimes the part's going to be like a little dinghy, and you get in the dinghy, and you're there, and then back in the water, treading water. And then every once in a while something like Red Dead comes along. And it's like a giant yacht, and you're happy to stay on it for as long as you can, but eventually you're going back in the water, and that's just the nature of things. But it's not as though, I can't speak for Roger, but I expect he's going to agree. It's not like I woke up one morning and went, you know what, I think a cowboy video game is exactly what I need.
My first professional gig was in 2000, and I trained in Britain, and I started out doing theater and voiceover. I've done theater all over the world, a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of Arthur Miller, etc. My first voiceover gig was for a slot machine called Reservoir Frogs. Takeoff of Reservoir Dogs.
No.
And they wanted a Michael Madsen soundbite, and so I would just go, cherries, bananas. Depending, of course, which fruit appeared. So that was my first foray into that.
Be a frog and.
Yeah, man. And then remember, one of the frogs don't have ears, so it was a frog holding a human ear and a gun. He was kind of smiling. Look what I just did,
What was this doing on your head? Did you a favor cutting that off.
Yeah, but Ben's absolutely right. Anyone who's been at it long enough knows that any work is a blessing, and the joy is in the doing. But this is beyond our wildest dreams, because we never thought that we would get so much joy seeing how our work was received too.
So I did have a question that's a little more. It's a little ambiguous, at least with this game, considering that you have the ability to make the moral choices as a player for your character. Were there any decisions that you saw you depicted your character do that you either admired or kind of disdained?
Well, I don't know.
I guess you got to do both.
I knew that it's unlike unlike any other medium, playing as Arthur, I knew that I had even less ownership of the character than I would do if it was a play or if it was a television series. And I knew that the player was going to have an equal entitlement of ownership to Arthur as I did. So I guess, going back to one of my earlier answers, one of my main duties that I perceived to be anyway was to come up with enough ambiguity so that it would work regardless of how the player behaved as him, but yet still had come up with something that was still definitively a clear character, So I guess one of the ways that I justified that to myself was to remind myself that people are complicated, and we contradict ourselves all the time. And as long as it's done in a way that justifies the motivation of the character, whether it be, Arthur is in a gang and he does nasty stuff, but he does it out of a sense of loyalty and duty to his gang and loved ones. So I just always would remind myself of the complexity of the human spirit, for lack of a better term, and anytime I felt Arthur wouldn't do that, I considered it my job to find out a way in which he truthfully would. I had to come up with the motivation to make it work, to make it seem real.
Dutch didn't do anything. No. Somebody has faith. I like that.
I'll see the t-shirts here later, I'm sure.
It was interesting to have the art that I had that was kind of prompted. I knew what we owed because I knew where we ended up, and I was pretty lucky compared to other characters. And I knew I wasn't going to die. Which was kind of great. Like it allowed me to do certain things, and they had my back on them. Like, you don't see Dutch crouching very often. He doesn't go into low cover very often. People start shooting at him, he just walks. Which I really thought was pretty badass. But it was this interesting thing that we sort of, it seemed to me in the production of it that we really got the heyday of the gang set before they started throwing crazy stuff at me. And crazy is the wrong word for Dutch. Trouble, I guess, is maybe closer. But so it was a bit of it wasn't that it was hard to do, but when you're showing up for 3 months or 4 months and working as like this great leader who is there with all the answers for everybody, and you go from that to a guy that is uncertain of himself and is making terrible decisions that are injuring people that I've been caring about in a real profound way. It was an interesting journey, to say the least. And I remember, as well as I think anybody that's played it, but the scene with the final scene with Micah and Arthur and Dutch on the cliff, and knowing how, like, as an actor, you want to have a great moment of redemption, for lack of a better word, but instead I have to go and I got to step on his hand, and I've got to walk, and we're all, again, this is performance capture, so I'm sitting there and I'm watching Roger at the top of his game, wheezing and coughing, and I'm the guy that's got to go walk over and step on his hand. It did not make me feel good. So there were certainly decisions. I do like to think that in the work I was given the room, and not just the room, Rod, our director, and our writers encouraged the ambiguity of Dutch so that one person can walk away and they can say that Dutch was just a bad man. And I think another person can walk away, hopefully, and say, Dutch was confused, or Dutch was led astray, or Dutch was over his head or overextended, or what have you. I like that there's room in there for interpretation.
Well, I know that as the playable character, you had to go through many branches of like, okay, if the character went this way and that way, but I guess as Dutch, you would still have to all right, if the main character went this way, how would we need Dutch's reaction to when he did this, when he did this? So there was I guess, did you have to, was it trouble to keep all that in your head of like which version of Arthur you're dealing with?
Not so much. The one thing that I remember, I can be cantankerous. It's true. But of the things that I got in a snit about was having to record this dialogue of if Arthur was treating me disrespectfully at camp. And I was just like, that would not happen. I would not allow it. He would not survive it. But we had to, they would explain to me that it's not all, the character has some agency, the player is allowed to fuck with you, pardon my French. Okay, all right, so begrudgingly.
Throw dynamite at you.
Who does that? Nobody does that. Okay. Honest. Yeah, Mr. Marston.
Was it any trouble picking up the character after the first read, though?
It was scary. I'll tell you, it was getting Red Dead Redemption is pretty good. I mean, it's a remarkable. And again, I'm proud of every role. Big guy number 2, like I said, I am your guy. I swear, go find off center. Look at that. I'm not that proud of the word, but to have been a part of Red Dead Redemption, to have done that, it felt like I was justifiably proud to be a part of that, and I was so excited when the call came that we were going to go do it again. But then I started thinking, what if we screw this up? What if this thing that I'm so unabashed
What if the new guy screws it up?
What if they get another guy in and he screws it up? Although if you work with Roger, we talked about that before. We ended up, you don't often get to have a union as an artist with another artist. And we were, every important scene that I did alongside this man over here. He did not screw it up, I don't think. Does anybody think that Roger screwed it up?
Hell no.
I hadn't met him yet, and I was worried. And I remember showing up for the first day of the sequel, or the prequel, and really sincerely going up to Rod Edge and saying, what if we screw this up? And Rod told me to trust him. And every time I've trusted that man, things have gone well for me. So but it was still, when we would butt up against, like I expect all of you to play the scene where he and I are on the cliff being chased by the army. I saw those sides and I was like, no. It's too close, it's too cute by half. I was afraid that it was going to step on. And I had doubts, which is what...
Because they're the same lines as you all know, right?
It's echoes. But then when I actually, the day I did it, I still wasn't quite sold. But again, I trusted everybody that I was with. There was a couple of weeks later, and so what will happen with some of those scenes is that there'll be multiple passes of those scenes. So we did the scene, Roger and I in character, and then there were maybe 4 people that were playing the army that we were dealing with on the cliff. About a session or 2 later, so this maybe 3 months later, they're doing pickups for that scene so that the rest of the army is there. And the way they do that is the original scene is played again, and more actors, sometimes even the same actors, will be in different positions throughout the... And
the original positions are marked out, so you make sure you don't stand in the same place as whether another soldier is, basically.
And it was one of those days where I was wrapped early, and when you get wrapped early, you take off your leotard. thankfully. You know, you get back in your civilian clothes, but once you're back in your civilian clothes, you're free to move about the volume. If you're in your dots, you can't go on the volume because you'll screw everything up, because the machine will know you're there. But once I was out, I went in and I watched the scene happen again, and I saw what Rod had put together of our work, and I finally was like, okay, actually, not only do I think that works, I think all of a sudden, not only was it a great thing to do, what it does to amplify that scene at the end with Rob on the cliff, is now all of a sudden, Dutch at the end is remembering his friend, who he failed so terribly.
I think we're going to go ahead and start audience questions, so you can start lining up. Remember, one question, make sure it's an actual question. If you have two, you can ask one and then go to the end, and if you have time, go to the end. While that's getting set up, I promised myself I wouldn't ask you guys for a line, but could you just do Lenny one time?
Lenny! Someone asked me to cough, and I did that. I also got a round of applause. I did not know that was going to catch up.
My wife is the gamer in the family.
Oh yeah.
I was watching her play, and when she got to that, well, I guess you can call it a quest or whatever that line was.
Oh,
and
right.
and then Arthur's walking around looking for Lenny, and everybody is Lenny.
Yeah. It's like an Aphex Twin video.
Yeah. And it slowly dawned on me. Okay, so go ahead and start.
So when it comes to a lot of character arcs, especially ones that are as complex as the ones that you guys played, generally there is the kind of build-up or like the redemption arc or like the unwinding, so Arthur and Dutch. And I assume there's a really different way you would approach that kind of role. Do you guys have like a favorite way or a favorite type of art that you like to portray? Is there a certain type of character that just is, I don't know, more easier or even more enjoyable in any sort of way that you get to become?
Well, I mean, the more complex the character, certainly the more challenge and the more joy that I get in approaching it. But the way I approach interpreting a new character, I try and mix it up. I try to very seldom do it the same way twice, because I find that more often than not, you'll yield the same results. So I always try and mix it up. You know, there's always some. I used to look at animals, look at the way, the characteristic traits of certain animals, and I would also I usually always start from the voice. I try and find the character's voice before I do anything else, and then I'll start thinking about their physicality, where their center of gravity is, etc., stuff like that. But no two ways are the same. In my process, I try to change as much as possible, so as I can come about with as new and interesting results as possible.
And just for me, the writing is kind of the center of it all. And I try to make myself, for lack of a less pretentious phrase, available to the poetry of the role. And in there, I will find the way that it echoes in me, and there's an emotional connection that then I can hopefully communicate. It's a good question.
The revelation about Arthur's sickness really reframes and asks new things of the player in the final act of the game. So for both of you, thematically, what did that final act mean to you, or what do you learn, or what do you take from that unique journey of sort of the game's swan song?
Well, obviously there's echoes of Doc Holliday and that certain diagnosis, you know, which is a well-known feature in many westerns. But for me, I think that's the beginning of the path of redemption, because it changes Arthur's perception on his own life and on his own mortality. When he he's finally when he's confronted face to face with his own death, it makes him change the way he views his life and the effect that it's had on others. So for me, it was main focus point. It was like the center of the whole story, at least Arthur's story. Because I don't think he would have had the same moral journey if he knew that death wasn't suddenly looming over his shoulder like that.
Were you aware of that while production was going on? Kind of like a...
The scene with Thomas Downs was one of the first I did, and it was very specific on the page. Thomas Downs coughs into Arthur's face. I went, hang on a minute. And then I did what many other people did. I Googled when the cure for tuberculosis was discovered. And then I was like, okay, now I know why Arthur Morgan isn't mentioned in the previous Red Dead.
I love the game, and I think you guys were perfect casting for your role. Congratulations on the Video Game Awards.
Thank you.
I know you guys are kind of like, made to make me laugh and also playing in live spec. I just wanted to ask, are there any future roles or sort of things we'll see you guys in? Maybe do a sort of Santa Monica? Or, and I would pay for a Dutch Banner in Google Maps voice, literally. So I just wanted to say future self and see yourself looking forward to.
Dutch would steer you wrong. Like I said earlier, I'm back in the water trip. I'm hopeful. I had a lot of fun. Actually, the last time I was in Atlanta, Georgia, it was with Peyton Reed, who directed Ant-Man and the Wasp, and that was a lot of fun.
Filmed on location here.
I stayed in a wonderful place called Peachtree City for about 2 weeks. And it was at Pinewood Studios. It was shot. And near as I figured, even if Thanos snapped Agent Burley out of existence, he's back now. So my hope is that I get to run around and bubble through the Marvel Universe again. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But it's been my experience throughout my career that work tends to beget work. So I like my chances.
Thank you.
I've got a game coming out. We're starting working on it later this year. It's a nice, really cool children's story called Lunaphon. It's from Thraig House in Wales. Jacksepticeye is going to be a part of it, along with Brian Deckhart from Detroit Become Human. And his lovely wife Amelia. We're all doing, and that is just voice. We're just doing the voice on that one, but it's going to be awesome, and hopefully you check it out next year. Lunaphon.
This is a question for Mr. Davis. Who set more of the pace for Dutch's descent into madness and kind of like a quick, what are your general thoughts on being able to play a character who you already have lost in Red Dead Redemption 1, being able to play his descent into madness in a prequel?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. I feel blessed, just blessed, so lucky. But honestly, a dream come true. In terms of the descent into madness, there was the scene where poor Kieran comes back to camp, not entirely intact. We shot that scene, and then we finished the firefight. And at the end of the firefight, Dutch recognizes that he got played by Driscoll of all people. And I had a moment, I remember walking next to Callie and I started banging on whatever the thing was. It was a wagon or something, and I'm banging on it, and I'm like stuttering and stammering, and I'm, freaking out. And Rod, the director, comes over and he says, if he's that crazy now, he will never make it to the first game. So it's a tough thing playing a leader, because a lot of your authority isn't demonstrated by you, it's demonstrated by the people that are around you. And so I had to have a lot of, forgive the term, but I had to have a lot of faith in the people that I was working with. In terms of the descent into madness, there was no one that I had that was more essential to that arc than Rod Edge, our director, and his contribution, working with him remains one of the great honors of my career.
Thank you.
Thank you, and call me Ben.
Howdy.
Howdy.
I guess that is appropriate, yeah. Some of the most memorable scenes from the Red Dead series involve music and playing in the background. Do either of you have a favorite piece of music from the series?
We're waiting for the album to come out. So much it was good. I love that Willie Nelson song when you're playing as John. That's fantastic. And of course that final ride, going back to camp to confront Micah. Beautiful song. Also the one when you're making your way back to the K after Guarma by D'Angelo. The music on it is amazing. The work done by Woody Jackson absolutely blew us away.
There's an interesting, I'm certain, in fact, you can find it on Vimeo, but there's a short film that I made with some friends in about 2005 in Arizona called Black Eyed Sue. And I had to learn a song for that. And I ended up using that song because I learned how to do it in this particular, the dialect and the kind of the wheezy, cracky, breaky sort of voice that I used for Dutch, I developed for this character Osborne Crawl. And then when I auditioned, I used that because I figured it sounded pretty good. And I got the part, so it sounded pretty good. But when I was trying to get back on model, you were asking this earlier, with the character voice, when I was returning after all that time, that song that I sang in that thing, which I think was called How Come That Blood on Your Coat Sleeve, which was an old song. But also, the song we had to learn.
Yeah, when we go fishing with
When we go fishing, that was great.
After rescuing Trelawney, that was towards the end of the whole contract. That was great.
Threw her on the floor and I knocked off some really, really wholesome stuff.
And the campfire stuff too, like when you bring Jack back after finally getting him from Bronte, and that wonderful song that Gabrielle Sawyer, who plays Javier, did. You know, and it's not easy to play guitar with those balls on your fingers.
Do either you play musical instruments?
I play harmonica, but they didn't ask Dutch to play harmonica. I think they should have. Hey,
Thank you very much.
Oh my.
I was wondering, were you guys releasing future content like maybe another Undead Nightmare or something similar like that?
Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you about it.
It's so funny you bring that up.
Sorry, man. You know, we don't want to spoil it for the fans.
That sounds like we don't know shit.
Who are your favorite characters aside from Arthur, Dutch, or John?
Sadie's awesome. I love all of them. I like Charles Smith. Oh yeah, he's pretty cool. You know, he's kind of torn. You know, he comes from two different worlds. He's not accepted in either. Charles Smith really does it for me.
Beyond those who you named, for me, the essential performers that were really critical to my art were Penny O'Brien, who played Molly O'Shea, and Curzon Dobell, who played Hosea Matthews. It was a surprise over the course of putting the game together and figuring out what the story was to learn just how critical Hosea was to the whole game. That Dutch couldn't. Dutch alone, we see what that yields, but Dutch with Hosea, you know, was a whole different ballgame.
Alright, so this is a question for you, Roger. You kind of had to be the your predecessor, you know.
John Marston's awesome, right?
Yeah.
Big shoes to fill. Yeah.
What was that like when you found out?
I was a little overwhelmed, to be honest, because I played the previous game twice before I even knew I was going to be part of the second one. And Yeah, I probably told some of you already. It was the one game that my wife really enjoyed watching. She liked the horses, and the scenery is beautiful. And yeah, once I found out that I was going to be the playable character on the second Red Dead, I was like, how am I going to... The people love John Marston. I kind of realized early on that trying to recreate what Rob Weedoff did would be an exercise in futility. I really had to do my own thing. And then I remember the first day he came, and it was one of the spoilers, but I assume most of you would have gotten to this point, was when you rescued him from the wolves. And then I'm looking at my pages, and I had to talk trash to him. John Marston. Rob Weedoff is such a gracious gentleman and such a wonderful colleague and partner in a scene that, that quickly evaporated. But then I had to lift the guy up, He's not light.
Okay, we're gonna return to the horse thing. Okay, so Ben, for playing Dutch, now the first game, he's pretty much obviously just a rude dude.
Well, I shoot a lot of people in that guy.
So, what is it? I feel like in Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a lot more fleshing out of his character, a lot more depth added. When you got the script, as it was unfolding to you, what was that like? How did you feel, or to learn more about your character?
Well, I was so excited to be returning to the character. I hoped, I nursed a faint hope that it was going to happen. And the success of the first game, I thought, okay, this might happen. But when they called, I still didn't really know what to expect. The first Red Dead as a job was maybe 3 months work. Within that 3 months, really, I think 3 rehearsal days, 3 capture days, and 1 day in the booth. That was tough. Yeah. And Nazis. And so when I heard I was coming back, and this time we weren't working in California, we were working in New York State. I hoped we were going to hear a lot of the story, but I really didn't know. Rockstar is, you might have heard, rather secret. They have to be. They're storytellers, and their stories have great turns and twists and whatnot. So I really didn't know when I got the call that this was going to be 3 months of work, or if it was going to be a year of work. And then after a year had gone by, is it going to be another year? And then after, it grew and grew and grew as we were doing it. We really didn't know. We didn't know when the first trailer was going to drop. We didn't know much of anything. So returning to the character was a bit of a mystery in terms of what the work itself was going to be.
Okay.
But as an actor, it was certainly a much more robust sort of approach to this guy.
Oh.
It was really something as we started to meet all of the games. One by one, we started to realize that these are the people we're going to be working with and sharing a secret with for what ended up being 5 years. And now I can go and I put the game on, and I can go walk through camp, and I hear everybody's voices, and it's like being in the green room on a busy day at the capture studio. It's really surreal. It's an understatement.
Yeah.
Because of our NDA, we had no one else to talk to about the work except each other. We ended up building as strong a relationship with each other as our characters did with the gang, So,
and then we started to train each other.
What was the moment you realized you were actually going to have such a big role in the second game?
Again, the scope of it, there was no way to know the scope of it. There was a day, there was a day, we've been on the show for about a year at that point, maybe even 2. We were still in the first capturing space that we were using. And
It's the scene at the beginning where we're on horseback and Micah comes up and he's got a lantern, but the lantern's not really a lantern. The lantern is like chicken wire around a wooden frame with a hook on it. And Peter Bloomquist, who plays Micah, he's got the lantern. We're up on horses and saddles, in spandex, with our helmets, and Rod, our director, is trying to give us a sense of the tone of the game and the moment.
It's a blizzard.
It's a blizzard. It's night. It's dark. Now, and I've been a gamer since Atari 2600, which was just called Atari. Remember that? I think I even played Sean. But we're not finding tone somehow that Rod is looking for. And so you go behind, there's sort of a bank of all these technical wizards doing previs, doing sound, doing all sorts of stuff I can't even figure out what they're doing. But they also have this sort of game world fun. And we're not allowed to see it.
We can see the environment where we're actually, sometimes they start to show.
Well, this was the bit, right? So Rod is trying to get us to understand the tone, and he says, come on back here, and he shows us where we are in the game.
And that was amazing. It's now okay, we're forgetting.
It's night. It's not like video game night. It's like night. It's pitch black. The snow is falling. There are footprints in the snow from the horses. The snow that's falling is filling in the footprints in this. And we're just looking at this thing.
The detail.
And we don't go back to shoot the scene. We just go back and we're like, just breathing heavy. What the hell is this thing? And I look at Rod. And I'm like, why did you shoot? And he said, because you can't know what it is until you see it.
That's one of the challenges of doing performance capture too, because you have to become aware of the environment that your avatar is actually in, as opposed to where you are in the volume. And you learn after you do it a while which questions to ask the animator. You know, what's the weather like? Is it day? Is it night? You know, we did so much stuff. Yeah, we had to be. Are we cold? You know, or is it just in and around Saint Denis where there's loads of flies everywhere and you got to be swatting all the time?
First day, when I saw Rod, and I said, I hope we don't screw this up. Because I was so proud of the first one. And he said, it's going to be better. And you're a proper character this time. So that was what right. Within, I didn't know it was going to be a 5-year gig. You know? But I'm not going to play.
Yeah, right. All right, let's go back to the horse, I guess.
You like going back to the horses, don't you? Why not? Horses are awesome.
So, your character has a really intimate relationship with your horse.
Okay, well, you're bad. No, you're right, he does.
But no more on a personal level, like of how people have pets and you know, it really affects them. Do you have pets in your life? Like, how did you draw from that?
I don't have any pets at the moment, but I have had it in my life, you know, and I used to ride horses when I was a teenager growing up in Ireland. Every weekend we'd go to the local stables and go on a little trek, and I hated jumping though, because I fell once and that was awful. But, you know, I enjoyed it, and I knew that this was going to be your main means of transportation, and that the animators again would help inform us by saying, you know, there's certain levels of bonding that you're going to have with your horse. So once I started rolling that around in my head, I was like, okay, so the player is going to be attached to it, you know. And then when we started doing cutscenes as well, which would be skipped if the player didn't have a level 4 bonding with their horse, when I started to realize that stat in the game was actually going to affect the narrative, and it would depend whether or not the cutscene would actually play, then I started to appreciate what the relationship might be. And so a lot of the horse stuff is actually, going back to voice acting and performance capture, a lot of the horse stuff was actually voice acting. I think it was about 2 days in the booth doing that stuff. And, you know, is Arthur's horse a mare or is it a stallion? And And then there's different dialogue if you have a level 4 bonding than if you have a level 1 bonding. You know, you're not quite as affectionate, etc. So we did that. And a couple of weeks later, I come back in. One of our wonderful assistant directors gets an Aldous. He says, Raj, we got to do those horse lines again. I was like, why? He said, well, it's a little too intimate. You know, it sounds like we're not talking to a horse. I was like, what do you mean? And he played it back, and I was like, you're all right, girl. Easy, girl. I was like, yeah, you're right. We should do those again.
As you said, you both played the games. You both play other games as well.
Not anymore.
No.
It is a big game.
What kind of changes did you see between the first redemption and the second one that you enjoyed?
As a player or as somebody working on it? Well, as somebody working on it, the changes were, I knew what was going on, say, also as a performer, and I mentioned this in the panel yesterday, but as a performer, in the first game we couldn't edit internally within the scene. So every scene, every cut scene you're seeing in the first game, that's top to bottom, that's one take. And in the second one we could, as you could do on a film and TV set, we could halfway through the take, screw up the line, just take it in and pull it out, which is how most days are accomplished on set. So that was nice. There's more freedom in that. And I guess as a player, I think there's sort of a promise in the first Red Dead of this era that has ended. And the game sort of feels like the end of things. And so as a player, it's kind of like, oh, I wish they'd gotten into this a couple of years earlier. And so when you go to Red Dead 2 and you see, you know, Tumbleweed in the first game, it's kind of goes down. But so to be able to go into Valentine, and, you know, I know the corner, I know the veteran, really they have Rockstar the achievement of Red Dead Redemption 2. I think it's easy to understate, but it is remarkable to me. I mean, it feels like a real world.
We're still discovering stuff.
I said on panels, I said, you know, I did this thing, but it got cut. And then on my second playthrough, I'm like, oh shit, hold tight, my friend. Oh, it didn't get cut. I just hadn't seen it. I missed it the first time.
It really took a village. There were a couple of thousand people who worked on this. And that's not even counting the actors, which there was a cast of almost 1,000 people. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear that? Well, I only played the first one. I wasn't a part of it, you know, but I had taken a big hiatus from gaming after I graduated college, and then I got an Xbox 360, and I said to the guy at GameStop, I said, I like open world stuff. And he says, all right, well then you want this, and then you want that. It was Skyrim, and it was Red Dead Redemption. And he did me good with those two, especially considering what went on to happen, you know. But my wife loved watching it. You know, I'm a huge fan of the Western genre. And again, just to underline what Ben said, all the little tiny references that you get while you're playing Red Dead of amazing Westerns in the past, whether you're talking the spaghetti Western genre or John Ford and Howard Hawks a little earlier on, all these little nods and Easter eggs that you wouldn't know unless you're a huge fan. Just, you know that the people who created this have a love of Westerns and a huge commitment to the genre. And They're literally transforming this from one medium to another, but in doing so, still acknowledging and respecting the cinematic Western. It was so cool to see that. So I loved it, and then being in the second one is the dream come true.
Okay, so if you could switch roles with anybody,
Why the hell would I want to do
I
that?
I said it, I was like,
No chance. No chance.
Yeah, I love Charles Smith too, though. Charles Smith is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, shoot the alley, killed him.
although I did get, I played Charles in one scene.
Did you?
Yeah, in the bar. I got to throw a chair.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That happened a lot, sometimes we would stand in with someone else if they weren't there, and then they would ADR it afterwards.
There was a day in particular, some of you will remember, when Milton comes to camp.
Yeah.
And what they ended up with is not exactly what we shot on that day. What we shot on that day, Dutch sort of did a little do-si-do around Milton before coming back. And as often happens, Rod made it better at the end of the day. But on that day, oh, it's too hard to explain. You can play back the scene, but so I got to be Dutch on half of the scene, and then we would play back that, and then mark out where the other characters would be, and then I got to be Pearson listening to Dutch in the same scene.
So they would layer it.
These kind of things started to happen on a day-to-day basis, and you started to become aware of the fact that you were existing in two worlds.
Yeah.
You were in a virtual world, and you were in a real world. And it's amazing how, over time, it became really second nature. But if we were on a 3-week shoot, I would start bringing in people with ping pong balls all over the ping pong balls on.
A lot of the new actors would always do the same thing. So they'd come into the volume, which would be a room about this size, and there'd be a big screen up there too where you'd see yourself in game. And they'd always go, "Oh wow, this is so." And it always did the same thing. Yeah.
so of course you have to share, if you can't pick your own character, of course, who your favorite character is. Even if it's from the first one. Everyone has favorite characters.
I like the guy looking for Gavin. he crunched that out in like half a day. Everyone in stitches. I'm looking for one mate. And then not spoilers, but when you take place and later on in the game and he's looking for Gavin for 5 years. Now he's getting a little bit of a scraggly beard and he's looking a little more dazed and crazed. They're like, that is comedy genius.
I don't know Sean's last name. John Haverly?
That's a good quote.
Sean Haverly did such a great job. He plays Reverend Swanson.
Amazing.
It's such a spectacular job.
You love yourself a fire.
It was really interesting to me because when the second trailer or the third trailer came out, he's got this great monologue about fire. You gotta love yourself a fire. And everybody was hearing it, and some people were thinking it was me. And it certainly wasn't. I was kind of offended. But the reality is the work that he did, and I don't know if you've encountered it, but there's a scene, like he saved Dutch's life.
That's at the campfire, right?
Yeah.
It's something that you could easily, some of you may not have even witnessed it, there's so much of this game, and no two people have the same playthrough.
Well, we've got, Sean's art is really cool. I mean, he starts out ruined, and he ends up kind of whole.
Yeah, gets clean.
As the whole camp is falling apart, he's pulling himself together, and I think he doesn't get enough love. Sean was magnificent.
Yeah. Some of those monologues around the campfire when he's, got the shakes and he's struggling from Morpheus's embrace. That was amazing. It was hard for you too because you were they dropped you at the end of the second trailer.
Right.
Everyone was going, who the hell's Arthur? Why can't we play as John? Oh wait, Dutch, he's in it.
So everyone was hounding you, and you still couldn't say anything.
I still couldn't say anything. It's a fun story. I couldn't even tell my nephews and my niece that, it's a Christmas time. This is kind of go home and see everybody. I can't tell you why, but they're great. But so my nephew Willie, who I think was maybe 11 at the time, he comes up to me.
He was 11 then?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think he was 10 when I started. Your son was just born, now he's 6, right? So things happen. This takes some time. But Willie came up to me and said, he looked me in the eye and he said, Uncle Ben, I know what you're doing. You are working on Red Dead Redemption 2. And I looked him in the eye and I said, I swear to you, Willie, I'm not. And because I believed that it was going to be called Red Dead Redux or Red Dead Rebellion or Red Dead something else.
Yeah, this Revolver, Redemption. Yeah, we thought they might have done it that way.
So the first teaser drops, and they bring us onto the volume. We got to see it. This was one part. We got to see that first teaser, that beautiful, beautiful sort of tone poem. You see Arthur walking out from the sun on the horizon, and it has that great line you do about
You better run and don't look back.
exactly. So that one drops, and we're sitting there, we're watching it with the entire production company on this big screen, watching it and loving it. Oh my God, this is so amazing. Look at this thing, and then it gets there and it goes, Red Dead Redemption 2. And everybody else is like, yeah! I am such a bad uncle. So I go to our producer, Michelle, and I say, you have to let me tell my nephew. I have to tell him. He'll be good. He'll keep the secret. You gotta let me tell him. So that happened. You were right. Red Dead Redemption 2.
Alright, so we're going to open up the Q&A. Our lovely assistant here, Hannah, is going to get everyone lined up. And while everyone is lining up, we're going to just voicefully give our last question. Alright, so out of all the lines that you have in this game, can you pick out just one that you really love? Or even if it's one that everybody's asked you to say over and over again?
They tell me I did something like 85,000 lines of dialogue. But I like there's one I like at the beginning when you're doing the sheep rustling mission with John. And it's quite thematic. It's the main theme in the game, I feel. Arthur says to John, he starts to see the writing on the wall and he knows that their time is coming to an end. And he says something like, I was prized pony once. This life, this way, well, we're the last I reckon, and we ain't long for it. So that kind of, for me, was a real central theme to the game. But people usually just ask me if I have some money for them. They like me to scream Lenny at the top of my lungs. It's just awesome, I don't mind. The fact that you guys love that, that makes me happy. And then every once in a while, if I cough, people are like, that's awesome.
I'm fond of the Bronte stuff. Yeah. Rob says, what part of your philosophy covers feeding a man to a goddamn alligator, Dutch? And I think that's the part that covers weakness, that part. It was us, or, the way I see it, might as well be,
and the death roll,
I just had a question about the romance between female characters. Obviously for Dutch with Maggie and with Arthur on first Molly, and then with Arthur, and then for Arthur it's Mary, and then to a degree maybe a bit Sadie. He has an affinity for her, at least as a fellow rider, I said. I'm just curious how you thought that developed their characters over the course of the game.
Well, I think Arthur and Sadie are friends, I don't know if there's any romantic implications in their relationship. And I kind of like that too, I think we're at the stage now where we can have a strong female character without automatically giving some sort of romantic interest. She is awesome, and she has as interesting an arc as anybody else, and I love working with Alex and I really like the relationship between Arthur and her. But with Mary, that was Julie Chesney, and she was amazing to work with. And I remember when she came over and we crunched out the first mission with her, and I think they liked it so much that they did 2 more. It was just a joy to work to do that, because we've all been in that position, haven't we? When an old flame, and you see them again, and it's all this whirlwind of emotions. It was a joy to be able to explore that. And it kind of makes Arthur's arc a little more tragic too, because you want them to get back together, but it doesn't quite happen. That helps add to the tragedy of the story, I think. So that was a joy to do, and it was great working with Julie.
First of all, you're the third or fourth person to say how amazing the performances are in this game. My question is, if there was a lesson that you wanted players to take away from your characters after the story was completed, what would it be?
For me, I'm quite fond, and I think it's, you're a journeyman actor. These guys are journeyman gang members. If Dutch has something in him that I admire, I think it's his hopefulness. As bad a guy as he is, he doesn't ever lose faith. And I've been fond throughout my life of a quote of Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, to travel, hopefully, is a better thing than to arrive. And I think Dutch would agree with that. If he's got something good to teach, that's probably it.
Yeah, I was just seeing it, especially at the beginning of the game, how much love he commands amongst his gang. You can tell he was a good leader. Whatever happened to the story, he was an amazing leader. But for Arthur, I like his sense of loyalty. I like his uncompromising sense of justice. Even though it's a little warped at times, it depends, of course, on the players' behavior too, and how they want to do Arthur. But yeah, for me, I would say definitely a sense of loyalty is something that I think is pretty strong.
Thank you.
Great question.
How you boys doing?
Hey.
First off, I love the game, obviously. RDR2 is a great game, but my question is for you, Mr. Clark. Did Arthur have some kind of relationship with Abigail prior to John Marston? Because I got this vibe. Every time I was playing, he would go like, hey, Abigail. And it's like, it had this vibe of like, we used to be a thing, but I hate you for being John now. Is that?
It suggested a little bit, I think.
Very.
Because there was some stuff that obviously a lot of stuff was cut, and don't consider it canon because it was cut. But if you remember, if you catch some of the backstory, John leaves the gang for like a year, and he abandons Abigail when Jack is like just a little baby, and Arthur really resents him for that. He resents him for not only abandoning his responsibilities to his wife and kid, but also abandoning his responsibilities to the gang, the gang that helped raise him as it did Arthur. So who knows what happened in that year? There was a lot of stuff that I did with Abigail where they were looking for a kind of forlorn relationship, like there was some sort of attraction to Abigail from Arthur. But it started to get cut. It got cut, but I think there's an underlying tone that remained when they suggested that to both me and Callie Moore, who did an amazing job of bringing Abigail in the second one. That there was this underlying tone of, I know you fancy me, I'm John. Well, it's something that kind of ebbed away as the years went by, but it's always, I'm glad to, it's interesting that you picked up on it. You didn't imagine it, let's put it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
that Red Dead Redemption is a great Western game, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is a great Western. So, in that same vein, what's your favorite Western, and that helped you find your character?
Well, I love Clint Eastwood, but to be honest, The Man with No Name is very stoic. Arthur talks a little bit more than that. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, I think, is probably my favorite Western. I don't see any Western genre, but I remember asking the Rockstar crew, what have you got any recommendations? And they recommended The Proposition, which is actually set in Australia, but for all intents and purposes, it is a Western, and Guy Pearce has to confront his sense of loyalty to his brother, and then Ray Winston forces him to betray him, which turned out becoming quite a major theme in our game too. But Toshiro Mifune, who was the lead in a lot of Kurosawa movies, and he was the samurai in Yojimbo and Sanjuro, which went on to become Fistful of Dollars and for a few dollars more. He was a huge influence in my work on Arthur, because just with his presence, and he had a lot of range. He could be very focused and intense, and at times, though, he had a great sense of humor too. So I based a lot of my stuff on Toshiro Mifune.
I spent a lot of time watching Man Who Shall Live Be Balanced. I love that film. I'm also quite fond of Unforgiven. So we all got it.
So one of my favorite things to do in the game was just spending time around camp at different times of the day, specifically when there was like a party or an event. I just sit there by the fuse. but I remember I would get so excited when I would hear campfire songs, and me do. But I was wondering how that felt. Like, was it very fun to build that camp atmosphere? And I know at the very end, as John Marston, if you go to the camp, you can kind of hear the ghosts of the gang members at each of the campsites, and I thought that was really cool.
There was one day that we've spoken about before, but it was really, really one of the most special days on the whole shoot. Almost all of the gang was all together. We were assembled around the campfire, and often when you do the campfire conversations, where some people would certainly be, but other places people might not be, depending on how the player is, where they are in the story and whatnot. But this one time, the whole gang was together, around the campfire, even with little Laszlo as Jack, and Gabrielle Sawyer-Sarong, who plays Javier, with his ping pong balls on his finger. He's playing that song that we played. That's when Jack was there. Yeah. But we were all there, singing along for them. But it was amazing.
They actually told some of the girls, "You're singing too good." That was awesome.
I mean, it's there. I mean, that's us. So you go and you sit down and you watch that. That's all of us right there as we were on that day. And thanks to Rockstar, that memory is preserved forever. It's just one.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask if there was, while acting for your roles, was there anything particularly interesting or challenging given the certain time period and setting?
There was, absolutely. 1899, we had a great team of researchers, though. But for me, I'd say the biggest challenge was because the majority of writers were British, are British. Every once in a while, you'd see a little UK colloquialism in there, and oftentimes it actually works. Because it is 1899, and when you listen to it in game, it sounds like antiquated American English. But every once in a while, we would say, I don't think you would say bloody here. So for me, a lot of the challenge, eventually I learned to trust them completely, because the level of research we did was insane. For example, we learned the F word really wasn't dropped that much back then. It was used mostly as a noun, and you never used it as an adjective or an adverb or whatever.
Except in dead.
Except in dead word, but you know, our researchers said, you know, that isn't. The S word was much more common back then. So trying to learn all the colloquialisms of the time is a challenge.
For me, the challenge I had was returning to the characterization of Dutch himself, and making sure the sounds matched the work that I had done 3 or 4 years earlier. 5 years earlier? The work I'd done in 2009. And I still hear, I can tell you, if we were sitting there playing the game next to each other, I can tell you where in the shoot we were based on how close I got to sounding like Dutch did. And I kind of gave myself a break because I figured his voice would change over time anyway. I had the advantage of having been a very heavy smoker when I played Dutch in 2009 after I've now been quit for almost 7 years.
Woo!
But I think it was a really cunning strategy on my part to make my voice sound younger because I didn't smoke anymore. But you still can hear there's some in there because Dutch doesn't have a southern accent. He has kind of a made-up accent, sort of a high plains with real hard R sounds. And I can still hear in some of the early stuff a little bit of a southern roll. You know, anytime he sounds a bit like Foghorn Leghorn, that was early on, and I wasn't quite on Powell yet. You know the phrase of the character.
Thankfully, you know, the game is set in a historically accurate setting, but you just need to look at the map to know that it's not geographically accurate to our country. So once we realized that, we knew it was a bit of a Wakanda situation, so that we had a bit of license. And of course, these guys are traveling all over the territories, you know, so speaking from personal experience, your accent does get a little mumbled and jarbled with wherever you're living at the time, you know. So consistency was more important than accuracy, I think.
Always is.
All right, thank you.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I wanted to ask how you felt about fans having a connection with the characters, and especially with Arthur, having a really affectionate connection, and how they portrayed on you, whether it be through art, edits, and videos like that.
It means the world to me that Arthur means the world to so many people. And like I was saying in an earlier answer, you know, the fact that you guys have as much, if not more, ownership of him than me now. Because once the game came out, it was out, you know, and you owned it as much as I did. And it just means the world to me to be able to share that with you. And the fact that you enjoy it so much, it's just something I can't smile out.
It means a lot to speak with you.
So I've played the game a couple times, and after killing a lot of people for reasons I don't really understand, I'm wondering, what exactly was Dutch's grand plan?
For the last time, make a lot of noise, make a lot of money, and get the hell out of here.
There are some particular somber moments of the game, that there are emotional responses. And I'm curious, because there were quite a lot of tragic deaths and redemption. Which one was the hardest for you to have to go through as you guys were going through your acting, and what was your preparation or recovery from that scene?
Oh, spoilers.
Spoilers.
Lenny was hard for me because when you're in that part of the game, you don't even have time to really address it because you gotta run, So that was equally tragic for me because Arthur isn't given the time that he needs or wants to really address, Lenny's death like that. Lenny had kind of become he'd become a mentor to Lenny too, so it really stung.
For me, Jose is a complicated one, it's too long a story, but the hardest one for me, and this might be of some interest, I guess, you don't know this at all, but the spoilers, when Arthur is on the cliff of Micah and I step on his hand, there was a raped stage, I guess you could call it, that I had to walk up and away. And Pete, so he didn't quite die in front of me, he's still wheezing and coughing. Peter Blomquist is screaming at me, asked Micah to come with him. And Dutch, in the moment, was realizing his failure. And I turned my back on both of them, and I walked up this rake, and I stood there as the scene continued to play out without me, and I just cried my eyes out. And I think 3 or 4 takes. And I even told Rod, you might be able to use some of that. I don't think he used it. But it was really hard. And that happened chronologically, not quite at the end of our process, but we had been working together for so long, and at least 40 years. And Peter, Roger, and I, for a large section of our work would come to the 3 of us. And so that was, in terms of your question about how you find the emotion for that, this was, in many ways, the bulk of our lives for 5 years. And we were only in it together. So even now, just talking about it, it doesn't take much for my heart to break thinking about how our story ended.
Thank you.
Thank you.